Stories. I was 2 when we moved into the large 2-story colonial house in Connecticut. Built in 1918 by an inventor who made his fortune during World War I, the house featured a basement with an empty coal cellar, detached garage, kitchen, dining room, living room, and study on the first floor, 4 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor, a front porch that sported 4 imposing 2-story Roman columns, and a large attic with a side room that once served as the maid's quarters. It even still had the old push-button light switches from the early 20th century. The home had originally been built for the inventor's son, and the spacious layout must have seemed like a dream to my parents compared to the small condo they had been living in. But what they didn't realize was that this house came with an additional feature not mentioned by the realtor: 2 resident ghosts. It didn't take long for the unseen to make their presence known. Soon after we moved in, my father left town on business. Late that night, as my 13-year-old brother and I slept soundly in our rooms, my mother sat in bed reading a popular new horror novel, the bedside lamp the only source of light in the otherwise darkened house. Just as she reached a pivotal scene where the paranormal activity in the story made a light bulb explode, the bulb in her own lamp burst, instantly casting the room into darkness. Too terrified to move, she sat there alone in the silence, listening for any sign of danger. Though none came, she knew she wasn't alone. To her, the message was clear: we're here. Not wanting to venture downstairs to get a new bulb, she set the book down and went to sleep. If my parents were otherwise aware of the haunting, they gave no sign of it in the years that followed. My father was a skeptic, so he brushed everything off as being symptoms of an aging house in a humid climate. But even from a young age, I was acutely aware that something wasn't right. Perhaps it was because the move was such a hugely momentous occasion in my young life, but my earliest childhood memories go all the way back to the weeks just after we moved in. Back when I still slept in a crib, long before I could see myself in the bathroom mirror without help. Back when I sat in a high chair and couldn't even see the top of the kitchen table. Back to the memories of looking for winning contest numbers in the caps of soda bottles, with the contractors my mother had hired to tear out the antique pantry and expand the kitchen. Back to the conversations with my brother in that narrow pantry before a new kitchen was even ordered. Even back then, there were certain parts of the house that I was terrified of. The basement was fine. You always hear stories of terrifying basements, especially the old kind that have empty rooms and creepy corners that never get proper lighting. In every memory I have of that basement, the entire back half is total darkness. But it didn't bother me. I was rarely ever scared to go down and play with toys that my mother wouldn't allow in the house, or to spend time with my father while he built things at his workbench. No, that was not the scariest part of the house. Not by far. When I was 3, my mother subscribed to Highlights for Children. I remember being fascinated by the page that featured drawings submitted by young readers, so I eagerly drew my own picture for my mother to send in, desperately hoping to see my name in print. It was a small drawing, mostly a scribble in pen on a small piece of paper, but to me, it was a masterpiece. When I was done, my mother put my tiny masterpiece in a bowl on an antique chest of drawers in the first floor hallway, so she'd remember to mail it to the magazine. As evening came and the sun set, I played in the living room while my mother watched TV. After a while, I suddenly decided I wanted to look at my picture again. But now I faced a dilemma, because the picture was in the hallway and night had fallen. Not even the light spilling out from the large living room archway could illuminate even half of it properly, save for whatever was near the front door. But what I was afraid of was on the other end, in the darkness, at the center of the house, near the chest of drawers, swirling around the base of the switchback staircase and recessed hall closet that were completely enveloped in darkness in the unlit house. Because that's where the lady on the stairs was. I only ever saw the lady a couple of times, a beautiful young woman in a Victorian dress, standing halfway up the first flight of steps, below the landing as if she were walking down the stairs, but standing perfectly still as if in a photograph or frozen in time. I never saw her move. Her dress was the most remarkable thing about her, an intensely vibrant dark blue, a color I wouldn't have words for until years later, electric blue. The woman herself seemed harmless, but the dress seemed to glow in its intensity, as if it radiated tendrils of energy that permeated the room and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I leaned out from the living room archway and peered down the hallway into the darkness. What might have been a few steps from my mother seemed like an endless journey of horrors to me. The air was thick with an electric, sinister energy, as if something invisible lay waiting just beyond the shadows to pull me into the darkness, never to be seen again should I venture too close. I begged my mother to come with me, but she only grew annoyed and refused. In the end, self-preservation won the day, and I gave up on my quest. My life wasn't worth risking a peek at something I could always see in the morning. Morning had erased the memory of the picture, however, as mornings sometimes do, and by the time I remembered it, it was gone, missing. My mother had forgotten about it as well and never mailed it. We searched but could not find it. Explanations were given. Maybe it was the wind, maybe it fell behind something, and maybe this was true. But it never reappeared. I was heartbroken. The identity of the lady on the stairs has always been a mystery to me. Who was she? Why would a woman in a dress from the late 1800s haunt a house built in 1918? Was she a relative of someone who had lived there? Has she died an old lady and chosen to take on the form of a happier time from her youth? I never mentioned her to my family. If they had trouble believing I encountered a moose while blackberry picking by the side of the highway that summer, they certainly weren't going to believe this. But honestly, it didn't seem to matter that much, because the lady on the stairs was mild compared to what was in the attic. Full of boxes, old suitcases, and racks of antique clothes, and smelling of musty, hot, dry wood, the attic had always been an adventurous place to explore by day, but a terrifying nightmare after dark. I was convinced from a very early age that the ghost of a man was up there, a bitter, angry man who hated everyone. He wanted nothing more than to be rid of us. I heard him in my room during the day when I'd lay down for my afternoon naps. It was the sound of a man breathing, perfectly in time with my own. But there weren't any men in the house at the time. It was just me and my mother. At first, I'd dismiss it as an echo or a trick of the ears. Surely it was just my imagination. But it didn't stop. Eventually, I realized there was only one way to prove whether it was real or just a trick of the mind. I held my breath and listened. Just like clockwork, the man's breathing continued. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a trick of the mind. It was real. He was in the room, and he was right in front of me, like he was watching me sleep. Unnerving, but otherwise harmless, I had to learn to ignore it. When I went to bed at night, I could hear him walking across my ceiling. Distinct footsteps in the attic, pacing back and forth for what seemed like ages as the wood creaked under his feet. It happened almost every night. I complained to my parents about it, but they always dismissed it. It's just the house settling was always their explanation. However, last I'd checked, settling houses didn't sound like shoes. They didn't have a pace, 2 distinct directions I could trace across my ceiling, and a gate. Someone was walking up there. One night, those footsteps got closer than they'd ever been before. The narrow wooden stairs to the attic were built between my and my brother's rooms directly over my tiny closet, and the door to the stairs was like any of the bedroom doors, white painted wood with an antique glass doorknob that made noise when it turned. It was also located directly adjacent to my bedroom door, which was left open at night. If I was awake, I could hear what was going on in the rest of the house. That night, I woke up after the rest of my family had gone to bed. I don't know what time it was, and I'm not sure what woke me, but it must have been late. I was acutely aware that the house was dark and quiet, and I could hear my father snoring across the hall. As I tried to get back to sleep, I suddenly heard the distinct sound of footsteps walking from my parents' bedroom across the hallway to the attic door. The doorknob turned and the door creaked open. I couldn't see the hallway from where my bed was, but I definitely knew the door was being opened. Then I heard the telltale sounds of footsteps ascending the creaky wooden steps on the other side of the wall I was facing. Once at the top, they began walking through the attic. I never heard them come back down. At the time, I was convinced it was my mother rummaging through old boxes for something in the middle of the night, so I went back to sleep. Over the years, I had grown accustomed to late-night goings-on, being just my mother doing chores. When I asked her about it the next morning, however, she was surprised and confused. No matter how many times I insisted I'd heard her, she kept telling me everyone had been asleep and no one had gone up there. I burned with anger, thinking that she was lying to me. I asked the rest of the family, but no one had any idea what I was talking about. Eventually, I gave up, and the footsteps on the stairs joined the ever-growing list of mysteries about the house. When I was 7, my father was offered a better job in California, and we prepared to move. Just a few weeks before we were to say goodbye to the house for the last time, I decided I needed to face my fears. I don't know exactly what prompted me to do it, but I decided to spend the night in the attic. I don't think my family fully processed that I was going up there to face the ghost that haunted me. No one ever talked about ghosts. All they really knew was that the attic scared me. My brother, who was now in college, commended me on my bravery and offered to join me. I gladly accepted his offer. It would definitely be safer with 2 of us up there, especially when one of us was an adult. However, on the day of the sleepover, he backed out. I decided to go ahead with my plan anyway. "You don't have to do this, you know. It's okay. No one will think less of you," he told me. I considered this for a moment, but something deep down told me this was my one and only chance to confront my fears, and that if I didn't, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. "No," I finally replied. "I'm still going to do it." He promised to at least help me get the sleeping bag set up and to make me pancakes in the morning to reward me for my bravery. I gladly accepted that offer as well and eagerly looked forward to breakfast. When bedtime came, he helped me set up my sleeping bag right at the top of the stairs so I could make a quick exit if I needed to, wished me good night, walked down the stairs, turned off the light, and closed the door. I heard him walk away, And then it was silent. Moonlight streamed through the large domed window and illuminated the dry wooden beams and random clutter that filled the attic. It wasn't enough light, however, to cut through the growing unseen dread that was beginning to thicken the air. I was the only living creature in that attic, but I was far from alone. The angry man was standing where he always did, just beyond my feet, above my bedroom, and although I couldn't see him, I could feel the intensity of his hatred and rage at my rude invasion of his space. The overwhelming feeling of get out.
Get out. Get out.
Filled the room and made me want to run. No, I thought in reply. I wasn't going anywhere. I had committed myself to sleeping up there, and nothing was going to stop me, no matter how terrifying it was. This was it, my one chance to face everything that terrified me about that house. I was going to stand my ground, and I was going to win. And then, as I lay in the dark at the top of the stairs, facing the open doorway of the pitch-black maid's room, I suddenly remembered what was in there. My brother's old 60s-era pull-string ventriloquist dummy. Once dressed in a nice suit and equipped with a monocle, his simple fabric body with plastic hands had been naked for as long as I could remember. The wide-eyed expression on his freckled face had always terrified my friends and I, even when we played with him, and his plastic head rattled when you shook it, because we'd once thought it a great idea to feed him a penny, not realizing it could never be retrieved. I didn't want him in my room. I definitely didn't want him in my closet, and once he'd been retired to the attic, I'd completely forgotten about him. Until that night. That night, I remembered with vivid accuracy. The ventriloquist dummy was in that room, and I was alone with it in the darkness. Terror gripped me as I suddenly imagined his shock of plastic, rattling red hair, and wide-eyed, psychopathic smile emerging from the darkness as he came to life in my head, moving like a shadow among the boxes before rushing at me from the doorway to murder me in some kind of twisted, vengeful horror scene from a movie I wasn't old enough yet to watch. My heart raced. The musty air was thick with menace and danger as I stared through the doorway at the blackness, waiting, watching, afraid of any sign of movement. I was now stuck in a terrifying position between two horrors, an angry ghost and a psychotic doll. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, and I didn't want to leave the safety of my sleeping bag to turn it on. I also refused to admit defeat and leave the attic, so I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes tight and kept them closed. If I could make it through the night without seeing any of the danger that lurked around me, nothing would hurt me. And then, just like that, it was morning. Somehow, within moments, I had traversed time. Sun streamed through the window. Birds were chirping. All was right with the world again, and I had made it out alive. I slept so soundly that night, I didn't even dream. I had simply teleported to morning in the blink of an eye, as if willing myself to safety. I quickly unzipped my sleeping bag and went downstairs to greet my brother in the kitchen. There was no smell of pancakes. Morning had erased the memory of his promise, as mornings sometimes do. He apologized, but there wasn't time to make them now. Pancakes would have to wait until another day. As disappointing as it was, I still basked in the glory of my accomplishment. I had done it. I had faced the man in the attic, and I had won. Not long after we moved, my mother told us a story about the house that has stuck with me ever since. She told us that she'd known the house was haunted, but she hadn't wanted to scare us. She told us that after losing his fortune to several bad investments, the inventor's son had hung himself in the attic. I carried this story with me for years. However, after doing some research, I recently learned that the inventor's son actually died peacefully of old age in that same town the year after we moved in. So if he wasn't the ghost in the attic, who was? Perhaps a different owner, and my mother got the story confused? Maybe it was someone else altogether, a wandering spirit taking advantage of an empty space while it was unoccupied. I'll never know. But I wasn't the only one who encountered him. The house has had several owners since we left in 1984, and thanks to real estate websites, I can browse recent photos of the home I grew up in from the comfort of my own living room. The porch railings may have since been removed, wallpaper changed, and carpets laid down over the once bare wood floors. But I'm fairly certain that, despite any changes the house has gone through over the years, the old ghosts, much like my mother's late 70s era kitchen cabinets, still remain and probably still haunt the house to this day.